Hey, hello everyone. Welcome in this MVA modules about cross-platform development with Visual Studio. Hey,
hey Eric. How's it going?
Fine. And you?
Fine. Great.
Okay. Hope
so
you
thanks everyone actually for joining us, and let's get to it.
Yes.
I guess people want to know what we want to talk about.
Okay.
Actually, we want to talk about us first, right? How about you introduce yourself?
Well, I'm a long Microsoft series. I come from France, as you can hear with my accent. Right now, I'm working for Microsoft Open Technology as a technical evangelist, and I really enjoy that.
Awesome. And I'm Olivier Bloch, and I'm also a French guy. Yeah. And I work for Microsoft Open Technology as well, and we'll tell you a bit about what MS Open Tech is about and why actually we're interested in that cross-platform development story. And I've been actually in the Microsoft world for the last, 7-8 years, and before that I was developing embedded systems.
Yep.
So I love gadgets, I like to make software run on them.
I remember that.
Yes. Great.
Okay.
Before we get into the actual topic, we want to set the expectation. So what kind of audience should we expect here?
Today we are going to talk about web development. So of course, HTML5, JavaScript, CSS developer are more than welcome. But if you have some kind of allergy for the web, stay connected because we are going to change your mind about that technology today.
Exactly, and so we also want to drive the discussion to explain how we think web technologies are great for doing cross-platform development. This is not the only solution, and we'll see what kind of solutions exist today, but web technologies are a good solution. And as a matter of fact, MS Open Tech is very much involved in contributing to the Apache Cordova project that we'll talk about. So maybe in like 2 words, can you talk about Apache Cordova here?
Apache Cordova is just the fact that you can have a website, a web technology, some HTML pages, and you embed that in a native application running on devices like Windows Phone, but not only Windows Phone, that's the main subject today, that work on iOS, that work on Android, and since last week, that run on Firefox OS 2.
Nice. Awesome. So there's also a couple other things we're going to talk about, like WinJS and other things. So before, once again, we jump into that, one last slide about the MVA community, which is a huge repository of training for you guys online. Over 2 million of you have now registered, and you can actually earn what we call the MVA points, 50 of them, visiting that website, ak.ms/MVA-voucher, and enter this code specific to the session you're now watching right now.
And win 50 points.
And win the 50 points.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
What is the day about?
Oh, we have a lot of things today. We have a lot of speakers because we don't want to be alone presenting this stuff. We invite.
They'll be bored with French guys, like.
Yeah. And sometimes the French accent can be an issue for you. So we invite some engineers from Visual Studio team, from WinJS, and to have something very animate.
Correct. So today, the first module we're going to talk about, the both of us, is how you can bring web skill and code to build apps for mobile platforms. We'll dig into one way of doing that with web app templates.
Yeah, what is web app templates?
What is what? Well, we'll talk about it. I have an answer for you.
Okay.
Then we'll look into what we call the multi-device hybrid app extension for Visual Studio.
Yeah, a very cool tool, totally integrated in Visual Studio, but let's see with the guy who created the code for us.
Yeah. So as it's real life, not everything works well the first time.
Already?
We call that le pays des bisounours in French, right? So that's not the case here. And so you will face some issues when bringing JavaScript, HTML5, CSS code into an app. And we'll talk about these issues, show some solutions to go through that. The last 2 modules of the day will be a deep dive into WinJS.
Yes, WinJS, it's very cool because it's very multi-platform, high performance, very nice themes, and you can use in Cordova, as we are going to see it today.
And last but not least, we're going to bring Mr. David Catu.
French guy.
Another French guy, sorry for that.
Yeah.
But definitely, David is the expert when it comes to 3D and WebGL. And obviously, considering the actual hardware performance, it's really interesting to consider WebGL, which is now cross-platform, because all of the mobile browsers today support WebGL to build a 3D experience into your mobile app.
Definitely.
Let's get to it.
Yeah, let's
That was
go.
a long introduction. Module 1, from web to apps.
But why cross-platform dev?
Why doing cross-platform dev is definitely the first topic we want to tackle. Obviously, why and then how.
Yeah.
Right? So what are the options and really what are the steps for bringing your web experience into an app? Apache Cordova being definitely the platform we want to talk more about today.
Yeah.
And show some examples. You have some great devices and tools and toys to show us, so we'll go to that.
Yep.
And have these nice apps demonstrated.
So, cross-platform development using web technologies.
Why and what does that mean? So we're narrow the discussion because when we talk about cross-platform development, it can mean a lot of things. In our case, cross-platform, and that's for today's talks, is devices. We talk device platforms, iOS, Android, Windows Phone, Windows. We're talking these consumer platforms. We're not yet extending to the IoT or whatever else, even though,
Yeah.
you'll hear about that later on. And when we talk about the web technologies, we're talking about
CSS, HTML5, and JavaScript,
yes,
of course.
And a word you're going to hear me say again and again is web standards,
Yes.
right? Web standards, very important.
Yeah, very important today, but let's see that later.
Yes. So the first question is, you were asking, why would you want to go cross-platform? There's some very obvious reasons. I think the actual, area we're working on has moved a lot. Today, a mobile application is no longer about the application itself.
Yeah.
It's about serving services, about accessing data, information, and so on.
Yeah.
And in the context of cloud first, mobile first, I like to say cross-platform first, actually, because it's very important to be able to extend to reach more clients. Having more devices connected.
Yeah, for me it's pretty simple. I want to write once my code and run everywhere in Android, iOS, or Windows Phone.
Exactly. So that's definitely the bottom line. And but from a more business-oriented perspective, write once, deploy many is great, and run everywhere is great, and you need that. And reasons why you need that, another big reason beyond selling your services to more customers, is the bring your own device phenomenon. So especially in enterprises, right?
Yeah. It's phenomena we observe since a couple of years now, and become huge and huge. Even in Microsoft, you can see some guys coming with their own devices.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and actually, as the guy deploying the applications and line of business application, you want to deliver a single experience. You want to go beyond, the OS itself, and make sure that you can maintain that application and redeploy and fix and so on.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
that's
And
very
you
important.
want to switch from device to another one. For example, if you are in a factory, you have a small devices, robust devices, and you switch to a small tablet when you're back in the office and this kind of thing. And you want to continue with your application.
Perfect. That makes perfect sense. The other thing is going through the stores to extend your reach. Right? Like giving an app for side loading as a zip file doesn't work much anymore. Right? So you definitely go through the stores, and therefore would like to still find a way to not have to reinvent, for each of the platforms, right? Yeah. And that next reason is definitely potentially because you don't have time for, or you can't afford to learn a new language and new tools, new technologies.
Exactly.
So that's something that there are a lot of differences in the native technologies to build app for iOS, Android, Windows today. And you might not want to actually have 3 teams working for each of the platforms. You might not have the resources for that. And actually, more longer term also, you might want to go in a place where you are developing once and deploying many, as you were saying.
Yeah.
This one is also related to what you're saying. You need to get to market fast and in many places at once. Right? Imagine you have the last startup was the greatest idea for a nice service. If you're not on all the mobile platforms, or at least on the major ones, rapidly, your idea might just not be something you can monetize at all. So you can definitely go there. And last but not least, why would you do cross-platform?
Because you can.
Because you can. Okay.
Easy.
So what are the common options to do that?
Yeah, there are several ones. The oldest one is, of course, C++. C++ is everywhere, on every device, on every kind of OS. Of course, C++ is very standard, and I think, and Olivier and you are really focused on the standard. C++ is really standard things, except for the interface. except for the graphic library. Of course, you have STL with C++, and you can write your code and potentially run in console mode in every platform, depending on the compiler sometimes, but in every platform. But for the graphic interface, there is an issue at this time. Perhaps in the future we will see a new graphic interface, multi-platform, but at this time there is some initiative, very interesting initiative, and at Microsoft OpenTech we follow some more for creative developers than for the enterprise business. But something like Open Framework, you can run on iOS, you can run on Android, you can run on Linux, Mac, and blah, blah, blah. So C++ it's a good strategy. You have the power, you have close to the metal, you have the huge potential of high performance. You have a learning curve for C++, of course, it's not so easy as the web technologies. And again, this lack of graphic interfaces perhaps stop the C++. But in the future, I will not be surprised if C++ reborn with a new graphic interface. But
Interesting. That's not a spoiler.
No.
The second language option, if you take it from the language perspective, would be C#.
Yep.
So obviously on Windows platform is .NET. C# is definitely a good choice.
Not only on Windows platform, because Xamarin Project provide a C# on other platforms. It's a very interesting project, and we work closely. Microsoft work closely with this guy now. It's very nice to see.
And back to the topic that obviously these are not the only options, right? Once again, we're not trying to narrow like the world. We're talking about the most common ones. And HTML5, the web technologies, are definitely a good option. And we'll see why in a minute. And a solution to implement that is something like that we call a hybrid application, a mix of native and web platforms. We'll see how that is built up, right? And that's what we want to focus on. And actually, that's what we want to talk about. Web technologies. So why would you go with web technologies for cross-platform?
First, HTML5 is finished. It's not a spoiler too, but you will.
Yes, it is a spoiler because actually it's a live event here, and in about 45 minutes you get some more information about HTML5 being finished. So stay tuned. Check out the various news feeds about HTML5.
But we can consider that HTML5 is finished, and the working group started the HTML 5.1 work right now. So we have a solid foundation to build the web of the future. We have a solid foundation to build the application right now with a really cross-platform thinking, really cross-platform technology, HTML5.
Great. And today, when you look at the modern mobile platforms, all of them have an HTML5 compatible browser. So HTML5 is finished, and that's great. At the same time, all these mobile platforms are actually tracking these standards and implementing browsers that support these standards. So that means we have a common ground across these platforms.
Exactly.
And in the same way, HTML5 is ready for apps from enterprise to gaming. Right? We're talking about line of business application. We'll talk about WebGL. So that's the full spectrum of
the apps. From the enterprise to the game, HTML5 is all-terrain technology.
Well, they can also consider the fact that you can very easily theme or put a skin on your app to go cross-platform. It can be interesting. We'll see scenarios where that is needed. Obviously, in the same area, having a responsive design, something that adapts to the various form factors. A tablet is not a phone. Now you have like these big, huge phablet phones that are actually our new target. So you need to be able to adapt.
It's very cool because you can spend a lot of time to adapt your application in different form factor with this kind of design is automatic.
Exactly. Cool. Great. You also have the choice of giving an online or an offline or an experience that is mixed. And what I mean by that is that you can choose to expose a web page that is hosted on a server in the cloud or something, or you can choose to have a pure offline experience, meaning that if the device is not connected, you still have a web experience locally because you have local storage and things like that. So that's really one of the things that you have options here with web technologies.
And the offline scenario are really important to consider when you write your application, because again, in the scenario you are in the factory, perhaps you are in a room without connection, but the application needs to still alive, and you can work on it.
Exactly. There's two things that actually are next in my list here that are actually dear to MS OpenTech, Microsoft Open Technologies. So we didn't mention that, but we are actually part of the subsidiary, which role is to bridge the Microsoft and the non-Microsoft world. So the idea to say when there's a technology mostly open source. It doesn't work on Microsoft platforms, whether it's a cloud or the devices. We like to go out, contribute code, make that work on Microsoft platforms. We also are looking into open standards, all right, because making non-Microsoft technologies running with Microsoft technologies implies that they talk to each other, meaning that working on open standards with the ecosystem, with the industry is very important to us. So here, we're talking about the fact that there is a lot of existing reusable JavaScript frameworks.
Yeah.
And we are contributing to them to make them work on our platforms. But also, you as a developer can just go and pick, because there's so many of them that are part of such a big, huge open source community that actually it's just like go shop and use them.
Yeah. It's just back to the MS OpenTech subject, because it's really interesting to see that you have today two French guys that live from Paris to go to Seattle and bet on the open source at Microsoft. We really believe together and at MS OpenTech that the future of Microsoft is around open source technology. That's why we invest a lot on this kind of technology like Cordova today.
Yeah, and we know that web is a place where there's a lot of open source developers and technologies and frameworks. And so we think that actually web technologies to build cross-platform apps is great because of that emulation around the projects and the fact that if something doesn't work, someone will go and fix it, if not yourself. So that's pretty great. Yeah. The last point is about, so we have HTML5 everywhere, right? It's great. Some years ago, it was not that performant. It was something that was pretty sluggish and slow. It was just for web. Today, we have very powerful hardware.
Exact. We have very powerful graphic hardware, even in few devices like a phone. And that's why, for finishing the day, we invite David and talking about WebGL. Because WebGL in 3D, it's a real technology you can use today in your application. So think twice about performance issue, because that you will see today perhaps open a door about new kind of application for you.
Great, awesome. WebGL, gaming, graphics actually is definitely the last big topic. I'm sure we'll left aside a lot of other reasons why HTML5 is great for cross-platform development. However, I think we can jump into another part here, which is talking about what it takes to bring. Now, let's assume you want to do. Well, we convince you guys. So we want actually to help you drive from. You have an existing website, or you have a strategy to go from web to your app. At a very high level, this is how it's going to look like. You start with a website. I think it's the the low-hanging fruit. You have a business, you have a service you want to sell, you go through a website. That's the best way to reach a lot of platforms: PCs, Macs, phones, tablets. Everyone has a web browser.
Yeah.
One piece of advice here is think web standards. That's very important, right?
Agree with you.
So different platforms to target. Yeah. The only common denominator here is web standards.
Exactly.
That you can count on and that you're sure of. The next step is going mobile, right?
Yeah.
So, what is specific to mobile versus web?
The size of the screen, the fact that sometimes you are in no connection area, so you need some kind of stuff for the offline scenario.
Okay, and so form factor, responsive design, mobile version. Once again, think web standards. These devices are running browsers that comply or not to web standards, so you definitely want to think about it.
Yep.
The next step, once you have a mobile version of the website, still pure online on the web, now you want to go with something which we call hybrid apps, right? You want to kind of mix and match the native and wrap, HTML code into a native app, still having the content being online. We call that web context, right? So that's something that actually is illustrated by the web app template for Visual Studio. That's one of the options.
The what template? The
what template. Okay. And with David, we'll talk about that in about half an hour. And then once you have that web experience wrapped into a native app, the next step, as you were saying, is going offline. Deliver an offline experience.
Exactly.
Right? Being able to have an app totally, self-sustaining, standalone, no need for any connection, whatever. Obviously, you want to have data connection, but you don't need it, right?
Exactly.
And so another thing which is important is accessing the hardware resources.
Yeah, yeah. If I want to access to my camera, to my storage, diverse sensors, can I do it with a HTML page?
Not all of them, because web standards are not all, to that point right now. So I know there are some standards about defining how you access your hardware resources from a browser.
Exactly.
But we're not there yet. I mean, it's for HTML 5.1 or other versions, but you have a solution called Apache Cordova.
Exactly, with the plugin. But let's talk about that later.
Remember, web standards.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Very important. Remember, web standards is very important. I think you're going to hate me for saying web standards all the time. One last time, web standards, right? When you're going to bring that code, that web code, into an app for a mobile device or for a PC, you're going to face issues. Right? Nothing, as we were saying, is just as easy as you would expect it. So my first advice is web standards, right?
Yes.
See, if you've not thought web standards, if you thought about specifics like adding vendor prefixes into your web code, which can be very useful. Some browsers are more in advance, I would say, or are trying to innovate in a certain direction in advance to the others, and you might want to use these new features that these browsers offer. And in that case, you start using things that only work in a specific browser, which is a shame when you want to go cross-platform. So when you're developing your web experience, you definitely need to think web standards. Exactly. That's very important. That will actually avoid big issues.
Yeah.
And when we talk web standards, we talk HTML5, CSS, JavaScript, ECMAScript. W3C is actually a working group driving the HTML5 definition. So web standards. Okay, I'm done with web standards.
Yeah.
So what's the next one?
Not sure.
Maybe I'm going to bring that back.
Okay.
What about the next one?
About the next one, of course, when you run on a window, you have different security context. One is like a sandbox, and the other you have direct access to the platform. So we have to take caution about that, and we'll see in the JavaScript compatibility, the next speech. No, the
one after. The one after.
What about this security issue, and we can deal with.
Yeah, definitely, because we're talking about apps, right? So basically running on a mobile device and potentially having access to your data, to your location. So there's some privacy issue here that you need to be careful about. As you were saying, the sandbox is not the same. It's no longer a website in a browser. Another important point is the integration into the OS experience. How do you bring, an app that actually is compelling, that will not be, not looking good, and let me be blunt, deliver an iOS experience onto a Windows Phone device, or deliver, a Windows Phone experience onto something else, might not actually comply to what the user is expecting. So you need to think about how you deliver a user experience, and at the same time, you need to think about accessing the hardware resources. That's what we're saying, right? So accessing camera, file system, motion sensors, and so on. Yeah. So hooking up into the OS could be tricky.
Exact. As you mentioned, the right user experience is pretty important because right now the people are well educated and have some used application with right ergonomy and this kind of stuff. So it's very important to focus on the design, on the ergonomy of the application, and of course, all these kind of sensor can help you with the motion sensor, with magneto sensor, this kind of thing. Yeah.
And to extend a little bit on the user experience integration into the OS, you sometimes have, for each of the OSs, something specific to it that you might want to use. On Windows Phone, it might be the live tiles.
Or other technology we cover in a few minutes.
Exactly. Let me not waste it. But you definitely want to consider specificities also for your app. Yes, you go cross-platform, but you want that integration into the OS to be fluid. So you definitely want to use some of these features from the OS. You'll see that something like Apache Cordova helps you using that. And we have other tools we're going to talk about that can help you do that.
Yeah.
And that's the perfect segue to Apache Cordova.
So what is Apache Cordova?
Good question.
So it's an open source project. You can see the link on the screen. This project supports all the major mobile platforms today, even Firefox OS, that I mentioned earlier. It's a really mature open source solution, and we just lived the PhoneGap Day last week in San Francisco.
So you just say PhoneGap. So some of you might remember Apache Cordova as PhoneGap. So people might be confused by what is what. So in a nutshell, Apache Cordova is the open source project that is owned by the Apache Software Foundation.
Exactly.
And PhoneGap is a distribution of Apache Cordova by Adobe.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So,
Okay.
Just to clarify that.
But for today, we are going to talk about PhoneGap and Cordova, mainly Cordova, with the same meaning, in fact. Okay, so with this brilliant and vibrant community, very, very active, we have a concrete project to port all your HTML5 and JavaScript from your website in a native application. That's the main goal of Cordova technology.
And so Cordova has been released version 4 a few days ago. It has evolved from being that little geeky toy thing to being something really serious. And we'll show that some very serious customers are actually now adopting Cordova to go cross-platform for line of business applications, but also for consumer application. And in terms of development tools, actually, you'll show some of the tools that allow the developer to go cross-platform from command line to a full integration into Visual Studio.
Exact. And this kind of technology, come from the command line interface, that's the core technology of Cordova, but we are going to see in the future some integration in IDE, and the first of the IDE is Visual Studio. And last week at PhoneGap Day, again, we have a good success about that because we are really deep inside the integration with Visual Studio and Cordova that enables some crazy scenario about iOS, Android, or Windows platform directly from Visual Studio, and you don't move from Visual Studio. That's very important. And of course, all the power of Visual Studio is for you. You can use profiling tool, you can use source code tool, you can use everything from Visual Studio for the Cordova project.
There's another piece of very interesting thing about Cordova. It's related to web standards. I know.
Oh, no.
So the idea is that Cordova explores a way for web code to access hardware resources and so on. And they define an API for that. So from JavaScript code, you have a Cordova API to access camera and other hardware resources. And that's the same API across a platform, because that's the way they define Cordova, and that's the way Cordova is designed. The philosophy of Cordova, when you talk to the main Cordova creator, is to actually go away. The idea is to be not only a solution for people to build cross-platform apps, but also to be a playground for web standards, where we can experiment APIs that can then be integrated into a spec for HTML5 JavaScript, and then be integrated into the browsers themselves, into the rendering engines that are in the app platforms. So this is a very interesting place to look into, and actually you will notice if you look at the Cordova ecosystem that all the major browser manufacturers or builders are actually in the community, contributing, working together. It's a very fascinating thing to look into, to work with, because you can fight with someone, and then when you are in the Cordova ecosystem, it's just like all together trying to make that work. That's pretty. It's pretty amazing.
That's the main reason why MS Open Technology is working on Cordova, because we really see the standard aspect, the cross-platform, and the fact that it's open source. It's very, very interesting project for us. That's why we invest a lot in it.
And it happens so that other groups at Microsoft are now interested in Visual Studio for that integration of Cordova to build apps for not only Windows, but also iOS and Android. And we'll have a really nice demos about that later on today. But also a team like Win.js, right? They're a cross-platform UI and data binding JavaScript framework. And they are very much interested in seeing how they can interact into a Cordova app. And we will have some demos about that also today. Yep. And last but not least, the Windows team is interested, right? They do see Cordova as a very viable solution to build cross-platform apps on Windows and other platforms as well. So that's a very interesting thing to look into.
Yeah, that's why we want to organize this NVA talk about Cordova, because it's something emerging at Microsoft and outside Microsoft, and you have to look at
There are also, when we talk about cross-platform development with web technology, a couple other things we recommend you look at. WinJS is one of them. You can get information on buildwinjs.com. You'll have a full hour session, about 45-minute session today about that. It's an open source technology, and it actually is cross-platform. It used to be something designed for Windows, but now went outside of Windows and allow you to use it on other platforms.
And the performance are really incredible. Just have a look at it.
And the last one?
TypeScript. TypeScript, it's the last language created by Anders Edsberg. It's very, very smart. It's a way to have a strong typing around JavaScript. And the output, it's very important to understand that. The output of TypeScript is JavaScript, human readable JavaScript. So you can use TypeScript to have a strong typing, to have all the tools you need, all the control when you write the code, and produce a very clean JavaScript, a very standard